Good morning. I am James Pennington, the Executive Director of Back Bay Mission, and I welcome you to this particular episode of, I want to say, Making Good Trouble on the coast for 100 years, but our episode of From the Executive Director's Desk. So I want to talk today about this particular day, which is called Indigenous People Day, officially recognized by President Biden approximately 1 year ago. It replaces Columbus Day. So this is actually our second Indigenous Peoples Day here in the United States. Now, this isn't necessarily a new idea. The idea was first proposed by Indigenous peoples at the United Nations Conference in 1977, where they talked about the discrimination against Indigenous peoples across the globe. But here in South Dakota, in our country, the first state was indeed South Dakota to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day in 1989. Here at Back Bay Mission, I made a decision this past year that this would be one of our paid holidays off. For us, for me, for all of us here at Back Bay, and for you too, to remember to acknowledge our history as colonialists who, quote, discovered a new land in the Americas, which was not a new land at all, but had been inhabited by different indigenous nations and peoples. The American Indian who walked this land hundreds and possibly thousands of years ago before we landed here as white colonists. Now there were, at least here in Mississippi, I want to draw it down a bit, there were 21 known Indian tribes in this area, which is present-day Mississippi. That was about between 1500 and 1800. But most of these groups were small, numbering only a few hundred, and many didn't survive the territorial conflicts between French and English allied groups of the 18th century. So we really don't know much of their history. But in Biloxi, where Back Bay Mission is located, there was a tribe or a nation that was called, quote, the Biloxi. It was a small Siouan-speaking tribe, and the name Biloxi meant first people. The Biloxi peoples lived around the Gulf Coast and Biloxi Bay. In 1699, they moved to the west shore of Mobile Bay. Why did they move? Because if you notice, the French claimed this land as their own in 1699 is when they came ashore. Consider the founding date of Ocean Springs, which is the next city east of Biloxi. Today is a day to honor Native Americans, the resilience, their contributions to our American society and really throughout history. And we know the sadness of the story. We know they faced assimilation, they faced discrimination, they faced an ever-expanding genocide for generations. Now currently in Mississippi, we have one reservation, which I call Indigenous concentration camps. It's the Mississippi Choctaw Reservation. And there's about 35,000 acres of tribal lands located in this particular tribe in about 10 different counties throughout Mississippi. Well, you've all probably heard of the Trail of Tears. There's some connection to that trail here in Mississippi. It was guided by the policies of President Andrew Jackson, who led the country from about 1828 to 1837. And it was called the Indian Removal Act of the 1830s. And the Trail of Tears was, for our indigenous brothers and sisters, literally a 4-month journey over 800 miles on foot here from the southeast over to Oklahoma. It's that forced migration of American Indian tribes because of the land grabs were threatening these tribes in the early 1800s. Our Mississippi tribes of Choctaw and Chickasaw were included and moved off their land here in Mississippi to Oklahoma. I called a friend of mine who is a leader on the Lakota Pine Ridge Reservation when I got into the office this morning. It's where I spent a couple of summers. And he always jokingly calls himself, in quotes, old man afraid of horses, because he feels like he's the only one on the reservation that has never had a deep connection to horses. He stated, in quotes, I still don't think I've fully absorbed what it has meant to me and to my nation here on Pine Ridge Reservation to have Indigenous People Day. It was a profound thing that the president did, and it means so much to so many people. But he said it also cannot make up for the injustices done against my people. But it's a nod to acknowledge those injustices and that this land was our land. A land rich in culture, people, hunters, gatherers, who always walked gently on the earth. So today, we remember, and we consider, even though we may not have been here, but our ancestors' part in the genocide of many indigenous peoples claiming this as our own. Native Americans have long criticized the inaccuracies of harmful narratives of the Columbus legacy that credited him his discovery of the Americas when indigenous people were here first. I do love the coast of Mississippi, and every time I drive across the bridge into Ocean Springs, I am reminded of this history because Ocean Springs has named itself the City of Discovery. And it certainly was when those French explorers founded it in 1699 and really forced the indigenous peoples over to Mobile Bay, forced the Biloxi Nation to vacate the land. I moved to Mississippi a year and a half ago now from Arizona. And Arizona has the third largest Native American population of any U.S. state. Almost over a quarter of Arizona's landmass is reservation land. The Navajo Nation has the largest reservation in the United States there, and the Tohono O'odham Nation is also in southeast Arizona and has the second largest reservation. There are 17 federally recognized tribes within the borders of Arizona, and 5 more of those Arizona territories span multiple states. When I lived in Arizona, I lived each day amongst the indigenous peoples of Arizona. They were obvious, they were there. And Arizona itself was a part of Mexico. Mexico ceded their land to the Americas. And the question I have is, I wonder if the indigenous peoples still lived in that area known as Arizona and had not developed it with nearly 5 million people alone who call Phoenix home, if the water resources would be running dry in this day and age, which is a severe problem there in Arizona. I believe what I admire most about the history of indigenous peoples is that they sought to live in harmony with the land. They moved, they set up their homes according to the seasons. They took only what they needed to sustain life from the land, and they offered the Great Spirit thanks for each and every grain of corn and animal that gave its food, its life for their food. And they didn't hunt for sport. Today is a day to honor Native Americans, their resilience, their contributions to our culture, to our society. It is a day to remember, a day to reflect on our history here in the United States, the role of Native people have played in our history, and can be a day to remember the impacts that white European discoverers have had on Native people and communities. But it's also a day to gain some understanding of the diversity of the indigenous peoples. So I'd like to close with this Native American prayer for peace that was shared at a gathering of the Lakota people one summer I was there at Pine Ridge Reservation. And so if you would, just listen to these words and sink deep into them. O great spirit of our ancestors, I raise my pipe to you, to your messengers, the four winds, and to Mother Earth, who provides for your children. Give us the wisdom to teach our children to love, to respect, and to be kind to each other, so that they may grow with peace in mind. I hope that's our prayer and our reflection on this day, to give each of us wisdom to teach our children, to teach our brothers and sisters and our siblings, to respect, to be kind to each other, so that we may grow in peace in mind and hearts. Let us share all the good things you provide for us on this earth, O Creator. May it be so. Thank you for joining me today, and join me again next week as We'll probably be on site somewhere or reflecting about some other issue in our culture, in our world, in our nation, in our state. So have a blessed day.